The DPRK's delegation was led by Yo Jong, influential sister of the DPRK's leader, Jong Un. What is the significance of Kim Yo-jong's visit to the Winter Olympics in PyeongChang? After reopening the hotline between the DPRK and South Korea, it is hoped that tensions might be eased after the Winter Olympics. What are the behind-the-scenes expectations for the Winter Olympics? Just ahead of Friday's opening ceremony for the 2018 Winter Olympics, the DPRK held a military parade in Pyongyang. It was to mark the 70th anniversary of the founding of its armed forces. Could the parade escalate tensions between the U.S. and the DPRK? China has repeatedly said it sees dialogue as the salvation of the Korean Peninsula, seeks to promote peace, and is actively opposed to war. What measures could China take to further promote peace on the peninsula?
As the Winter Olympics begin in South Korea to great fanfare and revelry, Yo Jong, influential sister of the DPRK's chairman of the Workers' Party of Korea, Jong Un, is attending the event in PyeongChang. This is in conjunction with inter-Korean diplomatic efforts and the delay to U.S. military drills. There has been increasing inter-Korean dialogue since the beginning of 2018 in an effort to avert further escalation in what would only become an incendiary and calamitous situation on the Korean Peninsula and between the DPRK and the U.S. over Pyongyang's nuclear ambitions. So far, efforts have been positive, and the rhetoric between Jong Un and President Donald Trump has been muted. With that being said, how are inter-Korean discussions progressing? What can China hope from such developments, and how will the U.S. proceed in its Korean policies after the Winter Olympics are concluded in PyeongChang? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Mr. Jong Un, Vice President of the China Institute of International Studies, and Anna Tangen, a CGTN commentator. We shall also be joined in a crossover by Jennifer Moon, a reporter for Arirang TV. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Welcome to Dialogue, gentlemen. What do you think of the enormous diplomatic efforts and the guts, the imagination, political will of the leadership on both sides, the two Koreas, to engage each other through the PyeongChang Olympic Games?
I think so far the two sides, both the South and the North, has made great efforts to create what we have so far, a positive momentum. Certainly for the Olympic Games itself, which I think the South side has made very clear they wanted to be a peace Olympic Games. But more importantly, I think it provides also some hope and expectation that the inter-Korea relationship would be certainly it is already on the sort of track of reconciliation, but in the hope that if there will be dialogues or contacts even between North Korea and the U.S. in the hope that the tensions and of the situation in the peninsula would be lowered down. But of course there are a lot of uncertainties.
I think this is more about PR at this point. Every side is trying to appear a little bit better or playing to their home base. In the U.S., Pence is playing to Donald Trump's base, trying to look strong and authoritative. I think Kim Jong Un is looking at the world and trying to say that, look, I'm putting half a foot forward. I expect, somebody to greet me. And I think South Korea, unfortunately, is the one bearing the brunt of this. They're the ones who are really trying hard to do this. But remember, the North Korean Constitution has in it that the North and South will be unified under a Kim dynasty. So it's very hard to get around that when you start talking about a reunification plan.
Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer. The rest of the world is following very closely what will happen between the two Koreas. I'd like to have your thoughts as to the symbolic implications, the trial balloon that was sent and released by Pyongyang.
Right. Well, very symbolic it is, as far as this will be an Olympics where the two Koreas will be marching under one unified flag. But more than that, North Korea's intent in participating in the Winter Olympics here, nobody really knows for sure, just like any other movement by North Korea, in fact. But as for the North announcement of having Kim Yo Jong travel to South Korea, this could be seen as both quite meaningful and significant. significant. She is the only sibling of North Korean leader Kim Jong Un who's been in the media spotlight, and it has raised hopes here in South Korea for a possible development in the inter-Korean front. And may that be a breakthrough or not? But experts here believe perhaps Kim Jong Un is sending her because he really doesn't trust anyone else but this 30-year-old, we're presuming, sister of his, and there is also a possibility that she could travel with a special message even for South Korean President Moon Jae-in on behalf of her brother. So all in all, widespread belief among analysts here is that the inclusion of Kim Yo-jong in this group of high-level delegation from the north, led by the head of state or ceremonial head of state Kim Young-nam, is significant and reflects the North's desire to present itself as a, quote, normal state on the global stage. Whether this will lead to something beyond the PyeongChang Games, and maybe even an inter-Korean summit, we'll have to wait and see about that.
Revelations of some of the details concerning the nail-biting negotiations between the two Koreas also generate headlines for those who follow the process there. For example, ROK will do whatever they can to avoid violating the UN-imposed economic sanctions by not buying tickets for the North Korean delegation. What do you think of any progress that could be made or any goodwill to make any compromise so that that will lay the groundwork for a smooth opening ceremony?
Yeah, I think ROK has tried its best. I mean, at one hand, it has the sanctions with restrictions. On the other hand, I think it has to, sort of manage, navigate these complications in the sense that prepare the ground to make sure the North Korea delegations, the high-ranking officials, would be well treated. So far, I think, despite the initial some difficulties, problem, I think up till now, the two sides through negotiation talks have managed to solve the problems in a way now we are expecting. So in this regard, I personally feel that both sides, have made efforts and shown seriousness in terms of bringing a kind of sense of sort of reconciliation and
solidarity through the 5 rings of the Olympic spirit is one thing, Anna. Having a kind of summit talk, a symbolic one on sidelines of the opening ceremony would be quite another, and I'm sure that will arouse media attention. There are a lot of media speculations as to whether a dramatic encounter in the corridor, for example, will be carefully crafted, will be carefully arranged, so that there will be a brief talk, brief chat, off the record or under the spotlight of the media. I don't know, but what's your take?
Doubtful. I mean, North Korea doesn't do surprise or chance encounters. I think it's pretty much limited to what they're proposing right now. Remember, in the background, you have Kelly, who's been openly advocating for a bloody-nose tactics in which there would be limited strikes against North Korea. This is not the kind of situation where you say, okay, let's have a few surprises in there. I mean, the difficulty here is people are having a very hard time figuring out what North Korea wants under Kim and what Donald Trump wants for the U.S.
Let me cross over back to Jennifer. Despite the hand-in-hand, which was, of course, a theme song of the Seoul Olympics quite a few years ago, what would be the powerful message that the joint delegation of the two Koreas deliver to the rest of the world about the future of the Korean Peninsula? Do you believe Koreans in ROK place great expectations on the symbolic presence of the DPRK? What would be the deliverables?
First of all, I'd like to make a little, I suppose, notice that we'd like to settle for the term discussions between the two Koreas when talking about what we can accommodate to the North Korean players and the team when they're here, as opposed to negotiations. Now, that's one little note. Back to your question, I think South Koreans view this as a more of a peaceful movement between the two Koreas, one that can ease tension. So I think one of your panelists said reunification, reconciliation. Yes, those are all very hopey words, but it's not something that is in the everyday lives of the South Koreans, and it's definitely too early for us to say any of that. This is just a a nice gesture after years of a dead communication between the two Koreas, and we will see a message of peace being paraded in the Olympic scene. There is a luncheon which will be hosted by the South Korean president, where Kim Yo Jong and Kim Young Nam and the rest of the delegation, North Korean delegation, will have a chance to talk and have lunch with the South Korean president.
Hospitality of the host city will of course be appreciated by all participants and players of the PyeongChang Olympic Games. You are watching Dialogue with Mr. Jong Un, Mr. Anna Tangen, and Ms. Jennifer Moon. We're discussing the latest thaw in the inter-Korean relationship with the advent of the PyeongChang Olympics in ROK. We'll be back in a short while. Please stay with us. Welcome back, gentlemen. A watchful U.S. is following very closely what's going on there, and Michael Pence, Vice President of the Trump administration, certainly voiced his complaints, and there must have been a lot of discussions between two allies as to why hostile rhetoric should be de-escalated at this moment and why military drills should be delayed for the moment. Ironically, and at the same time, February the 8th has been designated by Kim Jong Un, leader of the DPRK, as a day for military parade to commemorate the construction of their Army First principle. What do you think of this not very friendly movement?
Well, these are the shadows in the background of what otherwise appears to be a PR play by all sides. And this is what is so worrisome, that even when there's a simple opportunity, such as the Olympics, to extend this idea of truce and peace and let us start again, you have warriors on both sides who are sending signals which are less than friendly. Pence is also to blame. I mean, he's not going to necessarily have the greatest reception in South Korea. South Korea had a banner year economically, 3.1% growth, but you know, they're also facing this trade things with Korea, U.S. Things where Donald Trump has consistently criticized them. So behind all of this kind of all these smiles and things like that, there are agendas. The problem here is that no one knows exactly what Trump's agenda is, nor Kim's.
What do you think of issues on the agenda between Washington and Seoul with regard to the PyeongChang Olympics? Do you think the two sides, the two allies, see eye to eye on each issue on the agenda?
I think between Seoul and Washington, D.C., certainly there's one issue which they share, see eye to eye, is a peaceful, stable, secure, safe Olympic Games. That's why I believe when the news came, when President Moon...
Both agreed to give peace a chance.
Peace a chance, so that we can have peaceful and safe and secure Olympic Games. That's why when the news, when President Moon, when he asked President Trump for the delay of the joint military exercises, when he wanted to talk with when to have the participation of North Korea, I think the U.S. agreed. But as we discussed, that there are a lot of complications and uncertainties. Certainly, Vice President Michael Pence with it, and look at the agenda in Seoul is also, I think, for me, quite disturbing. He's going to meet the North Korean defectors, and is also going to visit the site of Pyongyang, where I think a few years ago, North Korea and South had incident, at the Navy. So it's a kind of very mixed and signals that that have not helped the overall, I think, stable and positive momentum. And that's why I think the Chinese Foreign Ministry and the minister actually is calling upon.
3 generations of the American leadership have been pretty consistent with their principle that the rogue states' bad behavior should not be rewarded. For example, legitimacy and credibility of the DPRK regime should not be recognized through the Winter Olympics. So that's perhaps the core of the issue, or core issue. What do you think of the defiance of Washington and the compromise that is to be made reluctantly?
Well, look, from South Korea's point of view, this is an unwinnable situation. If there was a war, you're talking about potentially millions of South Koreans being on the firing line and quite possibly killed. There's all sorts of, it's not just nuclear, there are also chemical weapons, biological weapons at stake here. You could see a devastating devastating situation happening in South Korea. So when those are the stakes, you are trying anything you can to bring some sort of sanity to an almost impossible situation.
Jennifer, what do you think of, say, the reluctance and defiance of Washington? And do you believe, following the success, the long-awaited success of Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, there will be more of military drills between Korea and Washington?
Well, we've definitely heard from the South Korean government that they have confirmed that there will be, the South Korea-U.S. joint drills will continue. It's just been postponed or delayed because of that. This is according to the U.S. side, that it was for logistical reasons. We can't have, they can't have their military assets here on the eastern side of the South Korean Peninsula or Korean Peninsula when there is an Olympic Games, which also requires that much defense and security personnel. They can't have that both during the Olympic Games. South Korea, for its reasons, have decided to postpone the U.S.-South Korea drills, but as far as the South Korean government is concerned at the moment, and the official response is that it will continue and it will happen after the Olympics.
Jennifer, let us know more about what's going on within political forces of your parliament as to whether more steps should be taken by Seoul to, for example, reopen the Kaesong Industrial Park and to encourage more family reunions with the permission of Kim Jong Un, of course, because he's the leader of a cash-hungry government that is come under the severe economic sanctions imposed by members of the UN Security Council, including the PRC, my country.
It doesn't matter. It's this regard of which political force you're in here in South Korea. It goes without saying that we will not allow North Korea to proceed with anything with the anticipation of a reward that's in terms of cash or whatnot, because we are strictly abiding by the UN Security Council sanctions. Now, having said that, I think the family reunions of Korean war-separated families, that's actually a very humanitarian issue that cannot be discussed under the frame of politics or diplomacy or whatever. This is a humanitarian issue that needs to be worked out between the two Koreas. As for the Kaesong Industrial Park, South Korea, the government is adamant in that it will not reopen the industrial park unless there is an agreement by the UN Security Council, a global consensus in, or a response from North Korea that, in fact, they deserve some kind of reward of some sort. There will not be a reopening of the Kaesong Industrial Park. Ray.
Thank you, Jennifer. What do you think of any chance for diplomatic efforts to be made between Washington and Pyongyang secretly? In fact, William Perry, former Secretary of Defense, said he was the special envoy and he gave the DPRK a chance of peace before the Clinton administration decided to launch preemptive strikes eliminating the nuclear reactor or the cold water reactor in the DPRK, and therefore, with that precedent fresh in our mind, will this diplomatic approach be repeated in any likelihood?
I'm not sure whether this will be working now and in the future, because if you look at the channels or channels of communication between our DPRK and the United States, there are several. One of them, the well-known so-called New York channel, which is between the DPRK UN delegation with the U.S. government. The other, there are several, either one track, 1.5, and others. But the problem is not the channel of communication, rather the willing political will, intention, particularly from the United States, whether to really want to have kind of dialogue or contact, leaving aside that would lead to negotiations. And I think if this Olympic game, for some reason, for some luck that would provide an opportunity that the U.S. and DPRK officials would have some contact, and then I hope that it would also possibly in the sense that open up more content. But otherwise, if the U.S. continue to, persist on its conditions and further pushing for more, tougher and more aggressive sanctions, and the DPRK continue to hold on. Its sort of demand for recognition of nuclear status. That would be.
By the way, what's the official statement about the thaw in the Korean relationship from the Chinese Foreign Ministry?
The Chinese side made it very clear this is an opportunity, window opportunity, and we have a positive momentum. We hope that China hopes that this momentum will continue, and the relevant side here, I think referring to U.S. and the DPRK in particular, they would grasp the opportunity and take steps to meet each other halfway, and so that the tensions will be lowered, and also find a way to have direct talks, because China believes DPRK and the United States are the parties directly related, and it is only them.
And are you convinced that President Trump has been held hostage by hawks in both the State Department and particularly the Pentagon to give China a hand, give China a chance about the DPRK denuclearization? Because any positive move by Beijing to further punish and discipline the DPRK will be appreciated by Washington, and this issue for the agenda of President Trump's foreign policy has always been prioritized since day one of his taking office.
I think you're looking at the wrong end of the horse on this particular one. There's a huge trust deficit that exists. Even if the United States comes around to this, the question is, can the United States be trusted? And if North Korea looks at Syria, Iraq, in these areas, they're going to say, look, any kind of defanging will eventually lead to a regime change. So from their perspective, I don't think that they would ever trust the United States. I think that the reality is we're at that situation where if there is going to be some settlement of the North Korean denuclearization, it will not be the United States who will be a main player. It will be other players, perhaps Russia and China. China
has been a broker for the six-party talks, the process of which we believe must have come to a halt. However, do you think China pays a heavy price for being part of the economic sanctions against our neighboring country, the DPRK? Because Foreign Minister Wang Yi says over and over that DPRK remains a normal state with every bit of its own sovereignty and independence. The understatement of which means it got to be respected somehow.
I think China has played a very important role, and it will continue to play a role in the sense that as a member of UN Security Council, permanent member Security Council, and it worked together with the U.S. in particular to find through the consultations and then various kind of resolutions. But the question is, as China made repeatedly, that it got two problems. On the one hand, of course, these sanctions and it has to be implemented and fully and comprehensively. But on the other hand, the UN Security Council resolutions also made it very clear talks, negotiations should be followed. That's why the China come up together with Russia, come up with that suspension initiative. And unfortunately, it seems that neither side, North Korea and the U.S., is not interested in that. By the way, the idea actually was originated from North Korea. So what we are doing, China is doing now is, of course, continue to call upon the parties concerned, U.S. and DPRK in particular. In the meantime, of course, China would continue to implement, to play a role as a responsible player.
Gentlemen, the latest news is, I was told, the latest news, Kim Jong-un, head of the DPRK delegation, will have a formal talk with his South Korean counterpart, Mr. Moon Jae-in, at the lunch, which is to be hosted by President Moon. What do you think will be the issues to be discussed?
I think it's going to be about reopening economic doors. They're going to say, show us some sunshine and perhaps we can find our way out of the darkness. I just don't see it. Remember, I mean, despite what my learned colleague has said, China has voted at the UN to label North Korea, in essence, a rogue nation. This is the difficulty, and I don't think anybody can see their way out. If South Korea unilaterally starts opening the door on economic sanctions, it's going to find itself on the ire from the U.S. and in violation of the UN things. So it would have to go back to the UN.
Don't forget, President Moon Jae-in is a student of former President Kim Dae-jung, who is a laureate of the Nobel Peace Prize. And initially, President Moon stands for kind of sunshine policy. At least that's the campaign pledge that he made prior to taking office. Therefore, the question, do you think President Moon is actually hoping for a Nobel Peace Prize through restoring the sunshine policy? For example, an invitation might be issued by Pyongyang for him to go to the DPRK and restart the peace negotiations, despite the strong doubts from Washington that the DPRK would never ever give up its nuclear weapons and ambitions.
It all depends on President Moon's moonlight policy, whether it will going to work. In the sense that I think at this moment I would also hope that it would help, bring back the normality of the inter-Korean relationship. And you look at the first, the meetings between, just after New Year, there are some agreements, between the two sides on how to kind of roadmap, how to resume the relationship. Of course, participation in Olympic Games is the first. Then it would come out the family union issue, the military communication meeting, and so on and so forth. But of course, I agree that there are a lot of complications, difficulties, particularly on the question of sanctions. For that, I think it will depend on the wisdom, and also I think the positive, mutually positive interaction between the two sides, and the blessing of the international community, United States in particular. Let us hope, and this is a chance, and if we can grasp the chance, and then we'll see that at least in the months ahead.
Yeah, I think if there's a new Nobel Peace Prize, it would probably go to Xi Jinping and Putin if they are able to actually solve this. This is well beyond. South Korea cannot negotiate this unilaterally. The United States is in no position, is not trusted, nor is it willing, and North Korea is not willing to give up the only leverage point it has, its nuclear weapons. The only thing that could derail this would be some sort of guarantee by parties that North Korea trusts that they would, in essence, their sovereignty would be respected.
Well, using Olympics or sports events as political means to improve bilateral relationship has its own historical inspirations, such as the ping-pong diplomacy in the early 1970s between the United States and the PRC at the height of the Cold War. That helped a lot in opening up the gate between these two major powers, and I hope this momentum will be sustained in the PyeongChang Winter Olympics. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.